Welcome to the Work is Weird Now podcast. Whether you're nearing retirement, entering the workforce for the first time, or caught somewhere in the confusing muddle in the middle, you're likely sensing it and you're probably living it. We know we are, and we want to know why. Listen in as we interview experts and everyday people like you to find out how best to navigate the ever-growing weirdness of work in the modern age.
Welcome to the Work is Weird Now podcast. Today's guest is Alex Szukalski.
Perfect.
Yes.
Oof. Thank you.
No pressure. And we're going to be talking about creativity and how do creative thinkers thrive in technical fields. But first, Alex, can you tell us a little bit about you and your career?
Yes, so Alex Szukalski, I'm a pre-construction director. I basically always had a bit of a creative side, but I definitely had capabilities in maths and engineering, right? So you have that moment in your sort of early years where you have to make a decision whether you go for the passion, the heart side of what you want to do for your future life, or whether you stick to school and go through that route. I remember saying to my mother, look, I want to sort of challenge myself in the creative field, but I could potentially sort of look at pursuing engineering. Look, Al, you can always be creative, but you only get this one opportunity to be an engineer. So go and do that. So I did it, and I got my degree in civil engineering. Got my degree, a very difficult period of my life, if I'm honest with you. As a creative person doing maths and engineering, there's a bit of contradiction there. Came out, got the degree, really struggled to get a job at that period of time, and then managed to get a position on site working as a construction manager. It was a fantastic period of learning, I would say. You're completely out of your depth. You're new to your green, so you're new to the industry, working incredibly long hours, but you're sort of trying to find your way through the industry, find your place, see what you're good at, and so on. And then I started to get involved in work winning tenders. So that's where I started to find a little niche, a little avenue that I could explore to bring in that creative side, but still leverage the engineering, the technical side of things. And then we won a project, and I can remember it. It was the Chartered Institute of Water and Environmental Management, and it's at Saffron Hill. And it was an old jeweller's, and it was a complete refurb, and that was the first job we ever won. So then at that point you think, right, okay, I've found my niche here. I've found something that I'm good at. Went on to work for a bigger construction company, big projects, was leading in pre-construction proposals, so it was a very sort of broad role. And then as you do, you progress through the ranks, and then found myself looking for bigger challenges, and then moved into another fit out and construction company that were working with major technology brands, banks, financial institutions, law firms, and so on. So now I could start to see, right, I can really start to flex my skills here from a creative perspective, but also as an engineer, as a technical person. So I've moved through the industry, through the ranks to get to my current position now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think it's interesting listening to you talk, because I think that historically a lot of us have felt like it was one or the other, right? It was creativity or technical skills. Those were choices, your avenues in school. I think we think of the left brain and the right brain almost containing separate aspects of those skills. I think what we're seeing in the industry, and certainly through this podcast and the people that we're speaking to, is that technical fields are becoming much more complex, as you would expect in the context of AI and things like that, much more digital, but also sort of more human-centered and quite uncertain. So we've got all of those kind of components coming together. So I think some of that historical division between technical fields and creativity is naturally dovetailing. And now we've got people saying that one of the top 3 power skills in the workplace moving forward for the next 10 years is creativity. And actually everybody needs to now be creative to some extent. But many of these industries still carry old structures and cultures that make it hard for creative thinkers to thrive. How have you navigated that? And what do you think needs to change?
Oh, do you know what? So creativity, and I question myself continuously around this, right? Because it is just so broad. I can't pin it to one thing, right? So if I give you an example of some of the experiences I would have on a day-to-day basis, just for context, right? So 1 minute, I could be working with a planner, developing a program with a project director, and we're trying to find a really creative and direct way to communicate that methodology. So it's a really specific task, but we're trying to be strategic, and we need to make sure that logic, that methodology lands. All the way through to working with a visualization lead, somebody who produces 3D visuals and models and so on, making sure that reflects our methodology or our strategy for a particular project. It could be working side by side with our social value lead, coming up with a brand new initiative, which is completely specific to a particular community organisation. They know exactly what they want, and we need to then come up with something to help them with what they need, rather than us giving them what we think they need. It's so broad. But the one thing I would say is, through experiences leading the work winning process on some really major projects, sort of 150 million plus, it all comes down to the environment that you create. So construction, I think we all have a different perception of what construction looks like, right? But from a day-to-day perspective, you can go into a room sometimes and you've got friendly faces and people are happy and they want to talk and engage. You can go into the room after and it's a completely different dynamic. There's a coldness. There's sometimes a bit too much ego in the room. People, maybe sort of living in their positions and their level of seniority a little bit too much. That doesn't create the environment that you need to go on and win a project or get people inspired to go and do great things. So I would say, from my experiences, especially over the last sort of 5-6 years, we were able to do fantastic things, very, very creative things. And that was as a result of the environment that we'd created for people. So if you walk into a meeting room where, say, I'm leading a particular task, we're all going to get on. You're going to be smiling in the room, right? We're going to do good work together because people are happy, they're enjoying themselves, and then we're productive as a byproduct. So the people and the human side to creativity is at the centre of it.
Yeah, so really creating those contexts in which people can come together with ideas, giving them the space to think, that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
And how do you think technical fields traditionally define creativity? Do you think they have the same understanding of creativity that you have?
I think the word creativity, people think that it's soft. So it's decoration, right? But especially in construction, creativity is not decoration. It's a tool. It's how we act. It's how we communicate. It's how we, solve challenges. It's actually at the root of everything that we do. So like when I wrote the title for my book, which is What's a Creative Doing in Construction, some of the feedback I've had is that when they read it, they feel like they're living some of their own experiences through that book. And that's because they are real day-to-day experiences that are recorded in that book. So it's interesting. So if you were to look at some of the profiles of people who have contacted me to say that, you would never think that they would say that. That you would look at, unfortunately, it's a stereotype because of maybe their role and who they are and so on. You would never think that they would say that. So it's really interesting.
In one sentence, though, creative and construction, the two things almost jar.
Yeah.
Don't they? And I think that's why it is so important. And why then do you think it's so important to have creativity in industries like construction that are potentially more linear or black and white from the outside looking in?
It's really interesting because I suppose, so the engineering side of me, I mean, there's an A to B logic in everything that we do. So, if you're producing a piece of content, there needs to be a natural flow to that piece of content. We need to make sure that there's, it's technically accurate, the information is correct and so on. So there's a logic to how we work. But then whilst we're doing that, we can still be creative with how we deliver that message or create that content. So what you've also got is we can find ourselves in a situation where if you're looking to secure a project with, say, for instance, it's a major media company, for example, very trendy, very cool. There's an expectation, especially in that early work winning phase, that you need to connect, right? You need to find alignment. So what you often find is, you could have a project manager who has naturally come through the industry acting in quite a rigid and very professional, which is fine.
Product of his environment, their environment, just to say he, but their environment, right?
Yeah. But then all of a sudden now they've got to go and basically dress down slightly, go and deliver a presentation in a TED Talk style manner, which is completely out of their comfort zone, right? But it's happening. It happens every day across the industry. I've just come from a meeting where that's exactly the case. So it's the creative aspect, especially in construction, is becoming, I think, more familiar. I suppose what I'm trying to do in the work that I'm doing is bring it to attention.
Yeah, I'm going to use an example here. I won't mention the client name that we worked with together. It was one of the first tender submissions that I was shown by the Win Work team, and it was somebody in the music industry, and the tender was inside a soundproof box that got submitted. Now that may sound so basic now, but I remember that was 8 years ago, and I was just like, "What? That's creative." Really thought differently about just the little touch points that you can have about being creative to make it more memorable and probably more enjoyable for people on your side delivering the work, that you're not just submitting any old tender. You're thinking about the end user, and it's flipping that.
Now, the one thing I would say, sorry, just to sort of caveat that, even though I operate in the early stages of construction, so as early as it can get, all the way through to when we say secure a project and then it's then led them by the operational delivery teams, I absolutely stay in contact with that delivery team, because everything that we create at that early stage needs to carry through the entire process, right? And we also want to make sure that what we're doing at the beginning reflects, we could be midway through the project, things, change and adjust. So how we communicate to a particular customer or consultant might need to change. So, but at least we need to make sure that what we said at the beginning is carried all the way through that process. But the work winning phase it's one of the most creative phases of construction. And it's really interesting because most delivery team members will pass through it. They have to at some point either lead a tender or lead an opportunity from a project management perspective, or technical services, or be a sustainability lead and be part of that process. So I'm very lucky, because when I'm operating in that phase, I get to see a different side to a project manager, for example. A project manager on site is a very different person than a project manager would be when you're in a room like this and we're bouncing ideas around how we're going to, create this new social value initiative alongside our social value lead. It's a very positive environment, because it needs to be. We're in sales at that point in time. So it is interesting that I think anyone who passes through the work winning phase probably will start to have an opportunity to be creative. That's their moment. But I think just the necessity now, because of the type of customers, because of the way that large businesses operate now in terms of their own cultures, their own values, the way that they operate with, even down to the way that they dress, I think it's broadening people's horizons in construction.
Yeah, and I think this is true of other industries as well, right? So we're looking, law, finance, things like that were kind of conventionally technical fields. I mean, there's no question that given the complexity of the world and sort of changing landscape, that the need for those people in those fields to be creative has risen, right? You have to navigate so much more. There's so many more barriers in your way. The environment is so different from what it was before. You've really got to be doing lateral thinking and giving yourself space and time to imagine a different outcome or a different route to the outcome across all of these professions. I think to date, we've all been victim actually to a system that pushes us into this world where we believe we are one or the other. I'm just thinking back to my days when I was learning programming languages at university. And I'm a creative. I've always identified as a creative. I was a good writer. And you give me a programming language, which is very structured, but for me is just another language. And actually the way that you pull those things together, you could do it in 100 different ways and get to the same outcome, but you actually have to almost imagine how the pieces come together in what is a very creative way. Yeah, I think we would all say that a computer programmer is a technical person.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and so I think these things have always had creative aspects to them. I think about my sister-in-law, who's an accountant. She's a very creative person. She does creative accounting. I mean, that sounds dodgy, but her job is actually to find ways around problems, right? And to solve problems for the organization. And I think what was striking me as you were talking was maybe actually we have all historically been creative. It's just that the project manager on site has been told to suppress that part of themselves. And so therefore they're not exploring that fully.
You touched on it earlier. At school, we had to choose options at year 9, and the creative options were on one side and the other ones were on the other side, right? It was almost like you couldn't have both. And now it's a very, very different world. And we've actually just recorded an episode on education being weird now, because is it still fit for purpose? When other countries, we talk about the Finnish schooling system, they look at things like communication, creativity as being a way to learn and thrive, whereas it's not that way here. But like you say, are we having to flex those now with the world that we're in? Like, I absolutely think we are.
Do you know, an example that springs to my mind, and he's a very, very senior engineer, and we were developing a strategy for a huge project, and he was leading the M&E side of things, right? And
just define that for the people in the
mechanical and electrical. Yeah, sorry.
The non-construction.
Yes, yeah. There's too much lingo. But he said, basically, the way that we need to manage the infrastructure aspects of this building, so the lighting, the power, ventilation and so on, we need to think of this like a game of operation. It's like operation. If you take one thing out, it can affect all of the other organs, all of the other sort of aspects of that particular building. It has to be maintained, it has to be live and so on. And he said, oh, how are we going to get this across? Oh, let's just draw it. Let's draw the game of operation, right? And we'll allocate, the heart could be, I can't remember what it could be, a comms room, or it might be the liver would have been the plant room, or whatever it was. But we were linking aspects of the building to that game. And we actually pulled together a visual, right? And that went into some of the information that was shared to a really, really major blue chip client. So it's really interesting, right? Because look, there are stereotypes everywhere. But that person, if you were to hear him speak, if you were to see the way he operates, you wouldn't necessarily call him a creative, but he created one of the most creative things that we've ever done. I mean, it's fantastic. So we can't stereotype, never stereotype.
I think in the context of AI, in which we will have an environment that will replace a lot of our knowledge, right? But arguably, and this is up for our debate, arguably cannot create human-style creativity. It can create, it can think agentically moving forward, and we'll be able to make some of those connections and be able to come up with ideas, but it won't ever have the sort of human creativity side of things. Do you believe that's true? Do you think that there's something special about humans coming together?
Oh, I love this. And I've got a couple of examples, right? So one would be, with content that I produce and share through my BrainSpark outlet on LinkedIn, it's illustrations and messages and narrative that I produce. So none of that information is generated by AI. I was already doing it before AI started becoming more prominent. But it's got to the point now where even if I was to try and adopt some of it, you would spot it. I would know that it's there. It wouldn't be true to almost like the art form that I'm trying to sort of share, right? But the example I've got is just as a favour for a friend. This was a little while back. He's a cool cat. He's a DJ, and he was like, "Oh, can you help me with just help me with one of my posters, right? One of my flyers." Now, this particular person has got a very specific style. He knew exactly what he wanted. He sent me a fantastic brief, right? So I'm working with him to create this flyer, and it was out there, right? It's very different. So I shared the flyer, and just as a friend, he was like, "Yep, you get my sign off. Fantastic. It meets the brief, right?" Anyway, then I thought, let me just plug that brief into an AI tool, and I did exactly as it was shared with me, and what came back couldn't have been any further from what we had created. So it's really interesting, right? So the brief is exactly the same. My interpretation of that brief was actually fit for purpose. The AI created something that, well, he said he would have put a cross for it. He wouldn't have been happy with it. Go again. So it's very interesting. It has its positives, as we know, but for me, maybe that's the old school in me. I don't think you can beat that, having a hand in something, right? I think there needs to be a balance.
Yeah, there's something about, and this is on my mind because I've just been helping my year 8 daughter revise for her RE religious education exam. And one of the topics was can AI ever really exist in terms of it actually being kind of genuine human intelligence? And one of the debates, or one of the aspects of the discussion she was meant to have, was around it can't have a soul. And creativity without a soul. And this is a whole other conversation, but creativity without soul is something different from creativity manufactured from knowledge. And I don't know if there's a question there, but it was just an interesting take for a year 8 child to think about at an exam.
But in the context, so especially in the context of so AI in construction, in the work-winning environment, there's a risk, right? So the risk is that we are asked a set of questions. And people will naturally now, because you've got access to a tool which gives you infinite knowledge, you will use that tool to answer the questions. So now there needs to be a shift, right? Because otherwise, if I'm a consultant or a customer on the other side and I'm seeing this, there is a risk you will see the same information, or it'll be very similar. You'll see the patterns, right? But what would almost be different is experiences, case study, evidence, right? So, and that's lived experiences. That's real. So that's been created by a person, experienced by a person. So I wonder whether there'll be a shift. The AI will always be there to help us with information and so on. That's great. But again, maybe it's the old school in me. You can't beat lived experiences and evidence of it.
So the book that you wrote, tell us a little bit about that. What prompted that, and then what do you hope will come about as a result of you having written it?
The book, it was one of those things. It was probably always going to happen at some point, but it wasn't planned. It was never the mission. And I remember years back, and I was running, and as whenever you're doing anything like that, the thoughts come and your brain's spinning and you're thinking things over. But I remember thinking, right, I'm experiencing some of the most diverse situations ever, because one minute I would go from, again, it would be a social value initiative where we're visiting a community partner, and I'm very lucky to be brought into a situation where I'm experiencing that with our social value leads, and all the way through to then the more technical aspects, so all the way through to just the day-to-day experience of working under massive pressure, right? Massive business critical opportunities, and you're one of the people sort of, spearheading the opportunity sort of thing. So there's all these different dynamics, these experiences, and the beginning of Brainspark and the book all came from me, a conversation with a friend and a colleague, and I'm bouncing around a bit, but it'll make sense. I said, look, I've got all of this stuff to say, and I need an outlet, and I need to be able to share it somehow. I need to be able to connect with people in the industry, and I think I know how. So I recorded a video, which is probably not very good, but it was very honest. Shared it on LinkedIn, and it got way more traction than I thought it would. But through friends and colleagues, so it was really nice. I thought, okay, right, I'm onto something here. So through natural progression, you start sharing, you pick up on different topics. But basically what I was doing through time is I would experience something, I would see something, I would have an idea, and I would materialise that into a narrative and an illustration. It tends to be both. And I would share it, and then move on to the next one. New experience, share it. And it's a continuous process. So I knew that all of that eventually would need to come together to be a piece of work, a body of work. What I would also say, sort of from a more personal perspective, is that as a result of being under huge pressure for such a long period of time, I wanted all of those experiences to mean something. I wanted to be able to look back. I know we had our successes, right? You experience it, but I just felt like I needed something more. I wanted to, for my children to be able to pick something up and go, oh, my old man created that in a really busy period in his life, but actually there's some value in it. So that's how it sort of materialised into being what it is now, and it is a collection of ideas, stories, experiences. It covers. I mean, every single page is a different theme, and there's a lot of pages, right? It's 60, 70, 80 pages. So, but the one thing I would say is it's honest, it's genuine. If you were to skim through it, it's very human centric. There's a bit of technical in there, but generally speaking, it comes down to people. So when at the beginning we spoke about sort of the technical aspects of creativity and the people side, obviously the technical aspect will always be there, but fundamentally the core of it is it's always going to be about people.
I quoted one of the pages in an episode earlier today.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. As our guest said, the most important thing to do is to listen. And one of your pages was around how many times are we in a meeting and there's louder voices. Have we actually stopped to listen to everybody around the table, and the difference in ideas that then come to the table of people feeling heard? And a few weeks back, we hosted an event where there was structured networking, where we broke out into smaller groups and everybody said something, they introduced who they were and their role, and it just changed the dynamic completely. And it goes back to simple things. The point there is listening, what happens when we do truly listen. And I think in a world where we're just go, like you say, everything's so busy, you need to find that time and space to be creative in whatever that means for you. Where do you find time then? Because you're a parent working in an intense environment. Where do you find that time to be creative yourself? The output is always in the evenings, so it's always late. I'm a bit of a night owl, to be honest with you. So I think naturally, especially if you've got a busy brain, right? So you'll be thinking about things, writing notes, or someone will say something and then it's in your brain. You can't get rid of it, and you think, right, okay, I need to do something with this. So I do a lot of running. So if I'm running, I think that's where you sort of start to rationalise some of your thoughts, and then it can then be a case of literally an hour, 2 hours in the evening. You start to pull something together or produce something, whether it's a piece of content or an image or whatever that be. But it tends to be in the evenings. But the collection of notes and ideas is continuous. Yeah. It never stops. I've got a phone pages full of notes, quotes. There was something that I wrote on the train today, which is creativity is not decoration in this space. It is a tool in terms of in construction. I could create an image of that. I mean, might do that. Do that later.
Always new ideas.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that's occurring to me as you're talking is that a lot of what you're speaking about is about presence, right? It's actually about being present in the moment and not just being a part of whatever's happening, but actually also being an observer on what's happening, right? So being able to pick out those things that make valuable lessons or that allow us to learn actively as we're going, as opposed to just sort of going through the motions. And even when you're talking about running, that being a very sort of present moment, yes, your mind's wandering, but you are giving yourself space to let your mind wander. And I think that is a theme that seems to me, for me, running through everything that you're talking about is actually we need to be a participant in what's happening around us in order to have some of those ideas and have the space and time to generate them. Does that resonate?
It really does. I mean, if I sort of give an example of a typical situation, when I say typical situation, a situation that I've experienced, and I'm certain lots of people who work in construction or connected industries would have experienced, and it goes back to the point around giving people time to speak and to communicate, right, and share ideas. You have very loud voices in the room. They've got a particular point that they want to get across, and they dominate that space, right? And if you've got sort of more introverted people in that room who, you know, they're not sort of the type of person to sort of speak up and sort of get their point across, you lose that opportunity. But what I would also say is when those louder voices are in the room dominating that space, you can't think, you can't share ideas. It's not the right environment. So I shared something recently which is exactly around that. You know, setting up an environment or a meeting or whatever it be, where you all get your time, you all get a designated piece of time, and you do what you want to do with that time, right? The interesting thing about that is that people come prepared because you've got your peers around you. So if you've got 5 minutes and you need to bring something to the table, you're going to do it because you don't want that awkward silence where you know you've got your moment and you're not saying anything. But the reason why I say that is that even in that time, you're hearing the different voices, the different perspectives, the different ideas. That's a time to generate ideas or share, you know, creative ideas, whatever it needs to be. But there's just a different atmosphere in the room to enable that to happen. Alternatively, it happens independently, doesn't it?
So what advice would you give to individuals who want to tap into some more of that creativity?
So this is a tricky one because I think we've all got our own preferences, right? Like, I mean, I like to do my sort of creative work in the evening. It's probably when my brain is, well, I use it as an outlet. It's an outlet for me. It's therapeutic in that sense.
And maybe the question is for those people who identify very much as technical people, how would you suggest they start to explore potentially becoming more creative or at least exploring that side of themselves a bit more?
I think they will make a decision when they're ready, or they will start to act in that way when they feel comfortable, right? But the reason why I say that is because then if you know that there are people who have that in them or have got value or they're even inclined to be creative or offer an idea, if you create a space that makes them feel comfortable, you know, that they're going to be listened to, that they're not going to be shot down, I mean, come on, it can't be happening. You're more than likely going to generate some sort of creative output from that person. The thing is, like I said, like construction, it's very hierarchical in terms of roles. You know, there are swim lanes for roles. People stay in their lane because that's the route. So it takes time, but there are lots of people like me, I would say, and us in the room who are confident enough to share our own creative experiences openly. And I think that helps. If people see other people doing it, they're more than likely going to do the same or feel comfortable to share theirs.
It feels like it's also maybe kind of a muscle, right? If you don't use it, then it's much harder to activate it when you need it. But actually, if you spend some time thinking and looking for other alternative ways to do things and that sort of thing, you actually sort of work that muscle a bit. It might become more natural to you to use it more often.
People are quiet though, and when I say quiet, there are everyone. I've just left a room full of people, and every single person in that room is creative in some shape or form. They say they're not. Some will say, "I've not got a creative bone in my body." Rubbish. Like everything you're doing in terms of problem solving, coming up with new ideas, you know, it's absolutely in you. So some people are quiet with it, but then sometimes you'll see, you know, a fantastic piece of work as a result of the work that they're doing, which is creative. And then it's there, and you sort of say, well, look at what you've just done. I'm not sure whether that's, you know, sort of fit for purpose. So maybe there's just a lack of confidence about being openly or attaching creativity to the type of work that they've done.
Do we need to define what creativity actually means? And I'm saying this because my previous company...
It's a bit late now, Dan.
Is it too late? We can put it at the beginning. Just a prime example. So Alice, you know what I'm going to say. A previous company, one of their values, their core values was creative thinkers, and the finance team were like, well, that's not me because I'm not a designer. And we had an in-house design team, 30 person strong. So it was really, really interesting coming from the marketing and the brand perspective, because people in that business were like, that's not me. I'm not creative because I don't act like I'm in, this part of it. But like, people almost align it with art, for example.
Yeah.
And it's not that. It's
decoration.
It's that piece. It's not that. Like, it's problem solving. It's so much more. And I think things that we're talking about through the podcast is work is weird now. Like, careers aren't linear. Tapestry careers, portfolio careers become more prominent because of things like AI. So thinking creatively about how you're going to approach your career in its entirety, and what do you actually want to look back on with your career and go, yeah, that's what I did, rather than just, it's different now.
It is. And I think those technical skills will get dated, right?
Yes.
They will be gone soon. They will no longer need them in the marketplace. And yet human creativity is something that will arguably always be needed. And so if we as professionals focus on those things, and curiosity is also something that we've been talking about on the podcast recently, also being a really important and no doubt goes hand in hand with creativity, right? Because you can't really be creative without being curious, I would suggest. Those things, those human skills are actually going to serve us across whatever our careers end up looking like as they unfold over the coming years, as we're all trying to figure out what the hell we're going to do with ourselves. So yeah, I mean, it just feels like it's a good time for not just industry to respond by promoting more creativity, because it's obviously a valuable skill in a context that's very unknown, but also encouraging people to flex some of those muscles a bit more and to look at themselves maybe through a slightly different lens that says, I'm not a technical or creative person. I could be both.
Oh, it's so true. And again, I am a creative person, and I'm happy to sort of say that, and I'm openly expressing that I am. I think sometimes it's not even, you can't define it. It can just be a presence, or it's just in you. It's just, if you want to go into a space and you want to help people and you want to move things forward, I just think it's always going to be more than one thing. But people just being comfortable with the word, I think, is for starters, especially in rigid industries, and it is happening more and more. I do a lot of customer research because of the nature of the work I do. I need to understand my audience, and I came across an acoustic engineer recently, and he's a cool cat, super trendy guy. You would look at him and think, he's maybe an architect because of the way he's presenting himself and his language and his imagery, but he's an acoustic engineer. So it's really interesting because he's blending a really technical field with things that you would associate with being creative. So it is happening, but I just think, again, it's people having the confidence to be themselves in a space is always going to be an instigator of creative things happening.
Yeah.
Right.
And you alluded to earlier that you've been given the time and the space in your career to be creative and almost flesh out what this means, and now you're a manager of people as well, right? And you're doing that same. So if we've got some managers listening, what advice would you give them to enable themselves to be more creative, but also give their teams more space? What does that look like?
I think people just need to feel comfortable that they can be themselves, that they've got support when they need it, actually. Because I think, generally speaking, now, that the people who I work with, colleagues, friends and so on, we know what we're doing. Generally speaking, we know what we're doing, right? So giving people autonomy to go and do what they think is right. We all understand the mission. We all understand, the goal that we're trying to achieve, sort of thing. But how you get there, I mean, you bring what you need to bring to help us to get to that point. I was very lucky. So the leaders that I worked with recently and most recently on some of those projects, one in particular, one person who I think a huge amount of, a visionary. He sees things that other people can't see, but he trusted his team members to go and do what they needed to do to get us to the end product, to the win. And I think that's massively important. So if you create a space like that, again, you create a room or an environment where people feel comfortable, they can express themselves, they can do good work, they've got support if they need it. Generally speaking, we get the productivity, we get efficient working, we get good end products.
Great. How can people find out more about you and find your book?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn, so look me up, Alex Szukalski. I do have a website, and it's www.mybrainspark.co.uk, and that's where you can find my book. I've just developed a set of creative cards and prompts, which is essentially a creative tool. So it's free, so it'll be on that website, so you'll be able to use those for any discussions. Doesn't matter what sector you work in, there'll definitely be of value. Again, not just being decoration, but creativity being a tool.
Great. I think we need a stack of those ourselves.
Absolutely do.
Thank
Thank
you
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.